Blue skies means fun days. Helping skydivers with tips and techniques about safety, training and fun jumping from those who know. Hi and welcome to this episode of Blue Skies Fun Days. Here is a question I've been asked a few times that reminded me of the time I lost a camera during a rather messy exit. As a skydiver, what are our responsibilities for anything we may lose or drop in free fall or under canopy? Fortunately in Australia, our Parachute Federation has a third-party insurance policy woven into our membership that has saved a lot of awkward and embarrassing situations. On the other hand, there are limits to this liability and what our responsibilities are. To learn more about this, I had a chat to our local skydiving barrister, Mark Higgins.
When you join the APF and you pay your registration for your membership, part of that registration fee gives you a public liability insurance cover. And that cover means that providing you are doing an activity which is part of the inherent risk of the activity, then that public liability insurance cover will cover you for any incident or damage that arises from the inherent activity. Now that phrase, inherent activity, means essentially that which might reasonably be expected to be part of the activities of skydiving. If you change that in some way, then any realisation of the risk which is outside that inherent activity means that you may become liable. So to use your example of cutaway handles or part of your helmet or an alti, say, they would be reasonably part of the inherent activity. That would be within the scope of the liability anticipated by the insurer when they offer a promise of indemnity. If you change that, that's when the liability might change. So for example, let's say you're doing a flag jump and you've got like a 10 kilo weight below you and you don't attach it correctly. Sure, the jumping of a flag with a weight is part of the anticipated activity that APF's insurer might promise. But if you don't do something correctly, you cause a realisation of risk outside of the inherent activity, and therefore you risk an exposure of liability.
Now for a quick physics maths break. Remember how in physics at school M1v1 had to equal M2v2? Well, that means that a flag weight falling at its terminal velocity, and that could be a lot higher than our terminal velocity, that lost 20 kilo weight off the flag has as much energy as a 1 ton wrecking ball moving at about 1.5 metres a second.
So too at a boogie, if you take a bicycle out of a skyvan, or if you take an inflatable item out and it floats down and obscures a passing car's vision. Sure, the floating object doesn't damage anything, but it causes damage by reason of the fact that it falls down onto the road and causes an obstruction in some ways. You have then done an activity which is outside the inherent activity of skydiving, and you have changed the scope of liability with that realisation of risk. We've all been to those boogies where people take hoops out with them, everyone flies through the hoops, and they're great fun, and it shouldn't be discouraged. I'm not coming along and saying don't do it, but if you do it, remember that once you take that hoop up, you are outside the inherent activity of skydiving, and you become liable if you drop it, or you drop it and it hits someone, or you drop it and it causes an obstruction, or you drop it and it causes someone to veer off the road because something suddenly lands in front of them. All of these things matter. And we know this from a 2021 decision of the Victorian Court of Appeal called Marks and Skydive Holdings Proprietary Limited. It wasn't about objects being taken up. It was about a woman who suffered spinal injuries as a result of a tandem jump where the tandem master landed, and they landed heavily. But importantly, the tandem master did not do anything outside of the inherent risk that comes with skydiving. So that was a good example of liability doesn't arise simply because something happens. It's a good example of liability arises because only where someone does something outside of the inherent activity of skydiving. What we know from our insurance cover is, let's say the spot's bad, let's say someone lands off, let's say when they land off they have a cutaway, let's say their canopy floats down onto the freeway and as a result an accident occurs, a motor vehicle accident. That's within the scope of the inherent activity of sport, so that you wouldn't be liable by reason of the realisation of that risk with a car accident occurring. So too, say if you've been asked to go and stand out at the swoop pond as the observer, someone comes down and they do a swoop, they get it wrong and they collide with you, then that's part of the inherent activity of skydiving, and the APF's public liability insurer would reasonably be expected to indemnify that loss to that person on behalf of the skydiver. Let's say visibility might be poor, or there's a risk that the spot might put you over encroaching suburbia near a drop zone. Then those circumstances might want you to think again about taking up items with you, because if there's a risk that you might have to drop an item, or that it just gets dropped as a consequence of someone going through it too fast or some such thing, then you might want to rethink taking an item up with you, because if it falls and it, say, hits someone or something and causes damage, then you're liable. And so those drop zones where there is suburbia nearby, or there are major thoroughfares nearby, for example at Picton, for example at Goulburn, then you might want to think again about the wisdom of taking items up with you. If you're confident you can hold it, that's fine. But it's when the risk realises that you're doing something outside of the inherent activity of skydiving, then you're liable.
In short, you're responsible for what you take up. Just as the pilot is responsible for getting you safely to altitude, you're responsible for all the equipment you carry. In some circumstances, you may be covered if something falls off and hits something or someone. Also keep in mind that Mark was only talking about the Australian Parachute Federation's policy. If you are jumping under another banner, such as the USPA or British Skydiving or one of the many other organisations, be sure to check with their policies, regulations and requirements. In the meantime, have heaps of fun, but do it safely. Blue skies. For more tips and techniques, click subscribe.